UKA rulebook specifically for field ref, which are still relevant. Now, the current state of affairs with the rules is that these are being updated by UKA, due to be published at the beginning of April. They will appear in due course on the UKA website. But from the 18 to 20 rules, the field ref has charge of all field events. Part of the role is to allocate the judges to each event and specifically allocate their duties to ensure safe practice at all times and to check the final results. All quite straightforward, so no questions on that, so we'll move on. To put the role of the referee into context with the management team, what I've put here is an abbreviated version of what's in the New World Rules, both for the competition director and meeting manager. I've lumped those together on the left-hand side, and then the technical manager. The simple way I would have of explaining the different roles of the comp director and the meeting manager is that the competition director is responsible for the technical side of what's going on the field of play. The meeting manager is responsible for everything else about the meeting, from the catering to the issuing of bibs and creating programs, everything there. On the right hand side, the technical manager is responsible for all the technical aspects of the things that don't move. So in other words, the technical manager is responsible for the track, runways, the sectors, and all the equipment, and the placement and removal of all the movable stuff. The technical manager is responsible for ensuring that everything is right in the competition area, and also responsible for any personal implements which athletes bring. Now, I put that there as part of the management team, and in higher level meetings, the technical manager's role is a very important one, and she or he will have an equipment officer and a clerk of course reporting. I guess the reality of life at local and county level is that the field referee tends also to be the technical manager and the equipment officer and the clerk of course, all rolled into one. So let's look for a moment now at those other members of the technical team, just to see where those responsibilities lie. So the equipment officer, the name says it all, responsible for all the venue equipment, make sure that it corresponds to the rules, make sure that equipment, both static and moving, is at each event site before the competition starts and is removed afterwards, and ensures if there are any records, that any record making implements are rechecked after the record. And the equipment officer will have 1, 2, or 3 clerks of course working with them they're the gophers, to do everything, all the running around. Now, until very recently, it tended to be the people were labelled as clerk of course field and clerk of course track. Over the past 12 months, that distinction I think has softened, and when there are clerks of course, as a team, they tend to work across both track and field. The important thing for both clerks in course and the field referee, have comfy shoes. You can easily walk 6 miles on a day as a clerk of course. All of that information is in a UKA supplementary document, which is being updated. So no questions on that so far, so we'll crack on. The accountability of the field referee is both up, down, sideways, every which way. I've chosen this particular order. I don't know why, but obviously the accountability for the athletes is to provide them with a fair competition, so they know that they're competing according to the rules and that the rules will be followed by everyone. The field ref has accountability towards all the other officials in creating the duty sheet to provide a balance of duties and ensure that they are within their capabilities, but providing some stretch, particularly if you've got officials who are seeking reports. Clearly, the referee has accountability directly to the management team to deliver the event according to the plan that they've set. And to the spectators, they want to see good competition with no undue delays. And Tony has asked there, who does the duty sheet for the clerks? In my experience, it tends to be the technical manager who works out the duty sheet for the equipment officer and the clerks. The overall accountability of the field ref, of course, to all is to provide a safe, enjoyable and worthwhile event. No more technical questions, so on we go. Okay, so the model of the staffing an event at regional and national and indeed international is that you would have a competition director and meeting manager, and I've left out the other people that you might see there, NTDs, jury of appeal and so on, and also, for the sake of clarity on this slide, left out the start team, the timekeepers, the jury and so on. But here you have the technical manager and their team in the middle, serving both track and field. And then you have the field ref, who looks after the field judges, and the track ref, who look after the track judges. Quite straightforward. Everybody knows what their job is, and away we go. The reality, in my experience at a local and county level, is that you will have a meeting manager and you'll have a field ref and a track ref and their judges and umpires, plus of course the start team and timekeepers and so on. So just to reinforce that point, the field ref often becomes or takes on the role of technical manager, equipment officer and clerk of course. So what does that involve before, during and after the meeting? The fun starts well before the meeting and as far beforehand as possible. It's often the case that the field referee actually has to recruit officials for the event. Certainly the case that the field ref will liaise with the meeting manager regarding the timetable. Is it practical? How does the timetable balance with the number of athletes in each event? Can we possibly get that timetable managed without undue delays? The more liaison which the field ref can have with the meeting manager on this, the better. That may well then lead to further discussion about how many attempts there are going to be, what the height progressions are going to be, how we deal with ties and so on. The field referee will also have to plan the scope of the checks to do on personal implements, especially if he or she is acting as technical manager as well. Just excuse me for a moment. Now, creating the official's duty sheet is something on which we could run a webinar just on that topic. And it could be that some of my colleagues who are level 4 field officials might want to volunteer to run such a webinar in the next few weeks. Now, there's a hint, Nikki. The duty sheet for league events is already done. For example, in YDL, you will find within the YDL national documents that for each meeting of each age group, each club is already allocated which particular duties they're doing. So that bit's taken care of. A very, very simple duty sheet might be to create a number of teams and then allocate those teams to events without giving specific duties. But a more typical duty sheet would, and here's one from last summer's anniversary games, would be specific as to the event. This one's probably the easiest for you to read. The event, it will give the start time, what time the athletes are due to leave the call room, because clearly that governs the time that the officials will need to be on site, and what time warm-up will start. In my experience, the most common single reason for meetings to be late, delayed, is because of the officials and the athletes not being on site in time for warm-up, and so the whole competition starts to run late. That can't happen if the times for the warm-up are clearly given and indeed announced by the announcer. So moving on from that one, the field referee is also likely to have to create a signing in sheet for all officials, such that your presence at a meeting is known and therefore you're covered by insurance. Ideally, prior to the day, the referee will check all the competition areas for the field events and the stadium equipment. Much easier if you can do that before the day. Here's this was what was waiting for me the day before one competition at a venue down south. I won't tell you which one. Tony's saying the signing in sheet, nothing to do with field referee. Yes, I agree, Tony. It should be the role of the meeting manager. In fact, specifically, it's written into that. In my experience, that doesn't always happen. So anybody like to identify what might be wrong with this particular shot sector? Tie down bars the wrong way round. Yep. Well, that's one thing. This was not for a para event, by the way. Oh, three of you. No sector lines. Indeed, it's the on this one. There is an assumption that the gritty area is the sector. If it's a tie down, no stop board needed. Yep. The reality is on that particular one that there had been a para event with seated throws. This hadn't been cleared away. Oh, and well done, John Morland. The sector is wrong. Yes, these barriers should be 2 meters away from the sector, not right beside it. And yes, Tasman, that's probably an optical illusion. The sector was correct. Good. So that's made sure people are still watching. Oh, hang on, let's go back. Again, this next one technically should not be a role for the field referee, but it's one that I have often had to do, particularly to ensure that athletes do appear in the right place at the right time so that warm-ups can get started without delay. And finally, the field cards, again, should be meeting manager, but the referee's task is to get those field cards from whatever computer they're produced out to the judges. On the day, this is a reminder that when you're dressing to work as a field referee, do please wear comfy shoes. 4 miles is probably the norm for indoor events. 6 miles, just like Clark's, of course, common for outdoor events. Get there as early as you can, and check anything that hasn't been checked the day before. The areas, check that the barriers, typically at many venues, there will be local authority staff who will be putting the equipment out. Some of them aren't as aware of the niceties of the rules as others, hence the need to check that things are in the right place. Stadium equipment and personal implements, useful to liaise with the first aiders. So that they know who you are, you know where they are, so you can cover that in the briefing. And check with them which events are likely to be the ones where they might be needed. I've noticed over the years that first aiders and indeed UKA doctors do tend to congregate around the pole vault. You distribute the duty sheets to officials, and then you're likely to hold a briefing. So even before the first event is started, there's been quite a lot of work to do, both before and on that first day. One of the questions which Pete Fitzpatrick raised prior to the webinar was what level, UKA level, should a field referee be for local events? It's not in the rulebook, but it is in the guidelines for competition providers. And the quick answer to that is that the field referee's level, same for track referee, should be one level above the meeting permit level. So in other words, a level 1 permit meeting should have a field referee who's at least a level 2. A level 2 permit meeting should have a field referee who's at least a level 3. Ideally, the field referee will be at least as experienced and qualified as the officials who are working with him or her. When it comes to briefing the officials, usually on the back of the duty sheet or on the first page, there's a set of notes which you can provide to remind all the officials of particular points about what they should be doing, things like height progressions, route from call room, what's going to happen about presentations and so on. The briefing gives you the chance to add to that. Just a reminder, if you're a referee at indoor meetings, useful to ask the people running the PA system to turn the music off while you're doing the briefing. If you're outside doing your briefing, useful for you to face the sun so that the semicircle of officials around you aren't having to squint to look at you. And here's a shot from the Northern Indoor Championships, either last year or the year before, which I think illustrates some of the points that you might want to put into that official's briefing. There are two long jump pools for the same age group going on at the same time here. This was under 17 women's long jump. And of course, many of these young athletes are the product of the Ennis effect. They were 9 or 10 when they were inspired by Jess Ennis, and they're still competing. We've seen a big bulge in numbers of young women athletes moving right through the system since then. So we've got a total of 27 athletes in 2 long jump pools competing simultaneously. They have to compete simultaneously in order that the top 8 across the 2 pools can go forward after 3 attempts. So you'll see here at Sheffield that the 2 runways, the takeoff boards are slightly staggered, but the critical point here about the officials briefing is to remind the leaders of those 2 long jump pools to alternate the takeoffs so that you minimize the risk of 2 athletes landing at the same time. Equally, you'll see that there's a 60-meter sprint that's just finished. So all the officials for these 2 pools of long jump have to be reminded to stay out of the line of sight for the timekeepers who are just out of the right-hand corner of the right-hand bottom corner of the picture. So that's just one example of the kind of things that you would reinforce during an official's briefing. And yep, absolutely. Photo finish and EDM are requirements for level 2 meeting. And just on a detail of that, Mike, this EDM is pointing at this pit. This EDM is pointing at this pit. So simple as that. Okay, your tasks during the meeting are simply to ensure that you're on top of everything that's going on the field. So you will be monitoring all events and checking the progress of each event against your timetable. What's happening now? What should be happening? What's happening next? Is everything in the right place? So you're monitoring all events, and not just from a distance, but walking around, checking that everything's going smoothly, ensuring that officials are taking their breaks. If you come across any delays, then another task is to deal with them as tactfully as you can. If you see that, for example, that a long jump is progressing very slowly because of slow raking, then a quiet word in the ear of the event leader, the lead official, to encourage the rakers to speed up a bit, and so on. So you tend to do those as tactfully as you can. Deal with any problems as they arrive, and then, and of course this is a big one, you're responsible for collecting and checking all results before they go through to presentation. Really useful to encourage officials to log the actual start and finish times for each event. The real value of this is to keep a track of the average times which you would use in planning. So by knowing the actual start and finish times, the number of trials and the number of athletes, you can quickly work out the average time. Because when you are timetabling events and indeed creating duty sheets and moving teams of officials around, you need to have a pretty accurate idea of how long each event should take. You'll also be making notes for any reports that you're required to write on officials, although ideally for reporting, you would have identified an official within the same team as the official being reported on to draft their reports. And of course, if there are any records, you'll need to check the measurements and then deal with the paperwork in conjunction with the meeting manager. I see there's lots of chat going on, which I'm not not dealing with, because I think you're dealing with it quite well between you. So many thanks to Taff and Andy and Tony and Tamsin for all of that. We'll crack on. After the meeting, clear everything away. That isn't a one-person job. That's ensuring that everything is cleared away in conjunction with the technical team. Really useful to note any problems. At some levels of meeting, every chief official is required to write a brief report. Always useful to make a note of any problems so that they're not repeated. And then, as well as completing any reports about other officials and the meeting, don't forget to do your own record of experience. I tend to do that ideally the same evening, or certainly the following morning, if I possibly can, because otherwise the detail tends to go out of my head. And certainly I find it much easier to do the job using the online record of experience. Okay, I'll pause there to see if there are any questions which I've missed that were directly relevant. Nikki, have you picked up on any?
No, I think any questions that have been asked, other people have picked up on, if you've not already picked up on it in the presentation. So I think we're fine. Super.
Right. And I'm also aware that if there's a sudden reduction in numbers of people on the webinar, it's because the Yorkshire Vet is about to start. So this will be an interesting challenge. I've got a few examples of meetings where things might go wrong. This one was a county schools combined events championship in the north of England in April. And unlike this April, where we've had unbroken sunshine, that particular day it was 4 degrees with a cold southeasterly wind gusting to about 25 miles an hour. So the wind chill was down to about 0. And during the afternoon, hail showers started coming in, and we were left with hailstones on the high jump run apron. So owing to that deteriorating weather, we were concerned about the safety of running the junior and the intergirls high jump. The boys had already happened in the morning. So our 3 options were, well, you're tough, go ahead, to try and postpone, or to cancel it. So again, I'm going to pause for a moment and invite you to put A, B, or C in the chat box. Tony's gone for B, B, B. Oh, lots of people going for B. Okay. What you don't have on this slide is one of the implications. Certainly, we discussed the notion of B, postponing. The complication is that, as with many schools events, this was on a school weekday, and the schools were scattered up to 80 miles away from the venue without any motorways. The further complication is that the winners of this county event would be progressing to the regional event about 4 weeks later. Yes, Taff, it was Cumbria. John's saying A. We really felt that it was we could have potential child protection and safeguarding issues if we went ahead because of the large numbers in these age groups and the cold weather, particularly high jump, where there's a lot of standing around between trials. So what we did there, we cancelled that high jump and we used the declared PBs, either from Power of 10 or those that had gone on the entry form, to give the points for the high jump for those age groups in order to give us a realistic pentathlon overall number. And it happened that it didn't make any difference to the girls who were expected to go forward to the regional championship. Okay, let's move on to the next one.
Sorry, before we move on, Alison Morland had a question around whose job is it to produce the risk assessment, and does this vary between different levels of competition?
Right. It would normally be the meeting manager, but the meeting manager could well ask the field referee to contribute.
Fab, thanks.
And we've got Tony and Alison. Oh, certainly ahead of the day. The risk assessment should always be done in advance, but bearing in mind that as well as the written assessment, then you'd be doing a dynamic risk assessment throughout the event. In fact, that previous scenario was an example of a dynamic risk assessment. Okay, so I take it with these responses now, we are your Hemant, I take it that you're responding to the this current slide. So you've obviously read it while we've been chatting about the risk assessments. So it's a YDL meeting in a country park, and in a nutshell, the runways were rather mossy, and we had an athlete who slipped. Tony, absolutely agree with you. Declared PDs could be 10 years old, but not if you're using up-to-date Power of 10. Yep. Okay, so we're seeing lots of Bs and possibly C. What happened here was that the with it being a lower age group YDL, some of the athletes had javelin spikes, others were wearing trainers. The athlete who slipped was actually wearing trainers. And so, oh, look at that. What was Tony? You could just do standing throws if all agree. Tony Tyndale, you've got the prize for this one. That's exactly what we did. We decided it was unsafe to go ahead as it was. And so we called together the meeting, the team managers for each of the YDL teams there to discuss the options. And one thing that was suggested was only to allow athletes to compete if they were wearing spikes, that was dismissed on the basis that that would not be inclusive. And so the agreed option was to go ahead for that event with standing javelin throws only. Not ideal, but fair across the board to all the athletes and agreed by all the team managers. And if they hadn't all agreed, then yes, we probably would have cancelled that event for on safety grounds. Simple as that. Good. One more. County Championship. All the age groups were on one card for the men's hammer. Partway through round 2, the retriever noticed that the implement that he was carrying back was the wrong age group. It was a 5 kilo instead of a 6 kilo hammer. They talked about it and then called in the field referee. And it was clear that that may not have been the only time during those first 2 rounds that that had happened. So the lead official asked the field referee what to do next. Answers on a postcard, please. Yep, you're all saying the same thing. That was indeed what happened. The event was restarted from scratch. Luckily, because of the low entries, there was time on the program, didn't cause any delays, and it was the only fair thing to do to restart, ensuring that when the retriever brought the hammers back, that they were put in separate places, and ensuring that the lead official checked the weight of each implement before it was thrown. So that's great. Now, this is the point where we can either knock it on the head, or we've actually got 7 minutes more of scheduled time. So, Nikki, should we go for the last, the encore?
Yes, go for it.
Okay. Here's another interesting one. This was a so-called international combined events meeting, and this photograph was taken when the venue was first opened. Fairly typical setup: track, apron, and the high jump bed with the cover on. When on the day of this meeting, in fact, the year of this meeting, this whole the bed had been moved slightly further onto the apron in order to provide more spectator space for the football pitch, which is in the middle of the infield. The implication of that is that we had one very tall, long-legged French decathlete who had insufficient room for his approach. He came in from the left, and he wanted to start his approach from somewhere near the base of this floodlight. And because the bed had been moved, even though this is regulation size overall, moving the bed meant that the effective size of the whole apron was below the required length and width. And in any event, as he was, of course, used to competing at meetings where you've got a 25 instead of a 15 meter approach, so he wasn't happy. What would you do? Oh, Hemant is typing because he was there. Oh, Hemant is not going to say. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. That's what we had to do. It was a shame for these athletes in the middle of day one of a decathlon, but owing to the number of people around, we encouraged the athletes and the officials to work together to move the bed, clear away all the debris that was underneath, such that the athlete had enough space. It was all good natured. It was a sunny day. It worked well. It delayed the, and of course we then had to relay the plane of approach line, recalibrate, and so on. And Helen said, yes, it was hard work. So effectively, we moved the bed onto the grass. Good. And the final one, this was a school's regional combined events championship. The venue had ordered a big box full of new crossbars, 3 for high jump, 3 for pole vault. They were delivered the day before the event, but they weren't opened. The field referee didn't arrive until the morning of the event. When the package was opened, instead of it being all 3 for high jump, 3 for pole vault, yep, you've got it. It was hacksaw time. It didn't take too long to take 25 centimeters off each end of a pole vault crossbar. Did it that way rather than taking 50 centimeters off one end, so that the central marking would still be in the same place, still be symmetrical. So let's get the TM hacksaw. You're right, Taff, but the TM was the field referee and the clerk, of course, on that one. So yeah, that's exactly what happened. Within the first couple of jumps, unfortunately, one athlete then broke that crossbar, so the poor old field referee had to go over the whole thing again and saw another one up. So that's my run through of the role of the field referee. Thanks for your interest all the time. Those of you who are who haven't yet taken on the role, it does sound as if there's a lot there, but do take the opportunity to do it. The likelihood is that you may well be asked and there'll be somebody standing at your shoulder the first time you do it. But do enjoy it. It's not as intimidating as it might sound, and it's great fun. If any of you do have any further questions, Tony, you're dead right. Yep. As field referee, take your toolbox. If any of you do have further questions that you want to ask me offline, you'll find my email address inside your new UKA rulebook. So thank you very much. Thanks for your interest. Thanks for your comments. Thanks for your answers to those questions.
John, can I interrupt?
Yep, of course.
Before the presentation, Tony from the South of England Officials Association sent me a link to a document that they have on their website, a really useful document about the role of a field referee. So I'm just going to paste that link into the chat box now, and people should be able to access it there. It's open for anyone to access, so that's a really useful document. This presentation and the recording is also going to be available on the website at some point next week. Thank you, John, for giving your time this evening to deliver the presentation. I think everyone's found it really, really useful. Just quickly, because we have got a couple more minutes. Has anyone got any final questions for John? just before we go that he can answer, because we're happy to take them quickly. Next week we've got Chris Cohen delivering a presentation on his experience through officiating to working at the World Championship, so that should be really good. And then the following week we've got one of our young officials who's got to quite a high level, India, delivering a presentation on engaging young people in officiating, and they're all open to book on now, so please have a look. And I think we've got Steve Marshall doing one later on in the month around gadgets and gizmos as well, so that will be great. Right, John, can you see the questions?
Yeah, Tony. Question from Tony. First job on arrival at site. That's a really good question, Tony. Oh, well done. Yeah, check that the tea is on. That's assuming that the catering people are there before you are. If you're there first, I mean, I tend to arrive as early as I can. If I'm there before other people, I tend to do a quick walk around the event sites of the events which are going to take place first in the program, and just see what's needed there. Oh, but you're all coming up with some brilliant answers. That's great. Brush the snow off the runways, yes, and dig the mud out of the pole vault box. Thanks, Tony. Appreciate that.
Fab. I think that's all the questions. The other thing I'd say is that if you have any topics that you think might be useful for, as John mentioned earlier, for webinars that you'd like to see, or resources that can sit on our website, please just get in touch. We want to try and provide as much as we can over this period for you. So please just get in touch with me and let me know. I think that's all the questions, unless, John, you can see any others that you want to pick up on.
Well, Hemant has just got, how far in advance should you get officials availability and levels? Just a quick answer to that. Ideally, and this goes back to last Thursday's presentation from the guys at Leamington. It's good to know early season who's available for all the local events that season, so that you've got provisional availabilities right from the start. Typically, when it comes to creating a duty sheet, that's usually in just a couple of days before a meeting. So there we go. Oh, people are still going. Right. If I don't know a name as a... Oh, yes. Yeah. It's a really good point that Tony's made there, that if there are problems, it's useful to pin down the root cause of that problem, not so you can name and blame, but in order that you can help people modify their behaviour. And yes, Taff, I've noticed too that there's it looks as if somebody might have hacked the UKA website.
Well, that wasn't exactly how we wanted to end the presentation, but thanks for the tip, Taff. Okay, I think we'll finish it there. Thank you, John, and thank you to everyone who's listened in, and I hope you found it useful. And I hope to speak to you, some of you, over the next couple of weeks at further webinars. Have a nice evening. Bye.